In this lesson, we'll take a look at the build.gradle file that was generated by the Spring Boot initializer. The file is located within the root of our project, and it serves as the build specification or configuration for our Spring Boot project. Understanding the build.gradle file is key to understanding how Spring Boot works with Gradle as a build tool. So let's take a closer look at our build.gradle file. Double-click on the tab to maximize the file, and you'll notice we are first presented with the build script block. The build script block allows us to specify configurations that are specific to our build. Within the build script block, you'll notice the ext block, and this simply contains a property that we would like to set for our entire build. So here we create a property named Spring Boot Version, and this acts like a variable that we can then reference within the remainder of our build script. So here you see the Spring Boot version being used to specify which version of the Spring Boot Gradle plugin that we'll be working with. And that brings us to our next point. Within our build script, we are able to specify dependencies that need to be on the class path when our project is built. And here we are pulling in a plugin provided by the folks at Spring Boot. We're able to download this artifact because we have specified a repository within our build script block. So here we're saying we'd like to access the Maven Central repository, and we'd like to pull down this artifact that we will use to work with Spring Boot and Gradle inside of our project. Having this plugin in place allows us to experience the benefits that we saw when working with Maven as our build tool. If you'll remember, we specified a parent for our Maven build, and that parent contained a bunch of version information about all of the different dependencies that may be required by our Spring project. We are unable to specify a parent within a build.gradle file, but what we can do is pull in the Gradle plugin, and this allows us to leverage a bill of materials that is provided via the plugin, and that allows us to leverage the versioning information that Spring Boot provides. So we no longer need to specify any version information when we download dependencies from our repositories. So you'll notice that within our project's dependencies, we are able to specify the Spring Boot Starter Web POM, and that artifact will be downloaded via Maven Central, and we don't need to provide any version information about that artifact. In this way, the Spring Boot plugin works with Gradle's dependency management system in order to facilitate how we pull down the dependencies of our project. Now, Gradle's dependency management system used to depend upon Ivy, but now the dependency management system within Gradle has been built out within the tool, and it is able to leverage both Maven and Ivy descriptor files. So it's able to read POMs as well. And that's how we get our starter POMs into our project. And here you can see we can specify them for different phases in our project's life cycle. So here our Spring Boot Starter Test POM is actually applied in the test compile lifecycle as opposed to the compile phase where the Spring Boot Starter Web POM is applied. Looking more closely at the top of our build.gradle file, you'll notice that we apply different plugins that we would like to use within our project's build. We can then invoke tasks on those plugins in order to achieve some piece of functionality in our build, and we're also able to set different properties that will apply to our project. you'll see here that we are excluding some items from our class path using the Eclipse task. Now, if you were not familiar with a particular task inside of your build.gradle file, you can always go to the Gradle website to further explore the DSL. So the build.gradle file is written using a groovy syntax, and there is also a DSL that we can reference when we need to know more about tasks. So here we are at gradle.org, and we're going to take a look at some of the tasks used within our build.gradle file. So on the gradle.org website, you'll go to Documents, and this will take you to the release notes for the latest Gradle build. And here you'll see the DSL reference. And this is going to look very familiar to you. It's going to look like the Java APIs that you may have worked with when writing Java code. So here you'll see all of the different blocks that are available within a Gradle file. And you also see different types that you can look at. And there's core types, and then there's other different types that you can use when configuring your project. There's quite a few. There you see like a find bugs type you can work with. There's also a type that will allow you to generate a Maven POM. There are many different types that you will find and possibly use. Now looking here at the Eclipse project, you'll see that using the Eclipse plugin, here's the Eclipse type, and you can further look at the options available to you within this plugin if you see something that you are unfamiliar with in order to learn more about your build and what is being performed. This is very similar to the Java docs that you would work with or when you would explore an API. Now, returning to STS, we're going to minimize our build.gradle file, and you'll notice that within the Gradle Tasks tab, there is our project, and within that project we have all sorts of different tasks we can run. So here we see the boot run task, and that is actually provided by the Spring Boot plugin. This allows us to run our application in place. So to finish up our lesson, we're just going to go ahead and run this Gradle task, and you'll see that within our Gradle executions, we will see the different steps within the task execute. There we see it compiling our Java source code, and once that's complete, it's going to eventually get to the boot run task within the plugin, and that's going to launch our application. So if we look at our console, we should see boot kicking off, and there it was. So there we see the Spring Boot ASCII art, and we know our application has been launched. And then we see that the Tomcat ports have been opened, and that our application is now running. So in this lesson, we learned about the build.gradle file, which is pretty much the equivalent of Maven's pom.xml file, and we saw how the build.gradle file is used similar to the pom.xml file in order to pull in the different starter POMs from the Maven Central repository, and that is done using the Spring Boot Gradle plugin. And that plugin also provides us with the boot run task, which we can then use to execute our Spring Boot applications.